Case 0.
She was looking down. That detail appeared on page 47 of a missing persons report I almost did not read, a single sentence in the witness statement. She was looking down. I marked it with a yellow highlighter and moved on. At the time, it meant nothing. 300 reports later, I stopped highlighting. My hands were shaking too much to hold the pen steady. I will explain what I found. But first you need to understand how I found it, and why the discovery changed everything I thought I knew about wilderness disappearances. 6 years ago, I began documenting cases that did not fit standard explanations. Not hikers who got lost, not climbers who fell, not swimmers who drowned. Cases where the evidence contradicted every conventional theory. Cases where professional searches found nothing. Cases where people walked into wilderness and ceased to exist. I built a database. I collected reports, interviewed families, reviewed search records, mapped locations. I was looking for geographic patterns, terrain correlations, seasonal factors, anything that might explain why certain people vanish, while others walk the same trails safely for decades. The data revealed nothing useful. Disappearances scattered across every region, every season, every terrain type. No clusters, no correlations, no predictive factors. I almost abandoned the project. The cases seemed genuinely random, tragic accidents without pattern or explanation. Then I started reading the witness statements more carefully. Not all cases have witnesses. Most people who vanish in wilderness are alone when it happens. But approximately 1 in 10 cases include someone who saw the missing person in their final documented moments. A passing hiker, a fishing guide, a fellow camper, someone who encountered them shortly before they disappeared. I had read these statements before, looking for information about the missing person's physical condition, mental state, direction of travel, standard investigative details. I had not noticed what the witnesses consistently described about the missing person's behavior. I went back through every case file with a witness statement. I read each account slowly, looking for patterns in the details. The pattern was there. It had been there the whole time. I had simply not recognized it. In case after case, the witness described the same thing. The missing person was looking down, not watching the trail for footing, not scanning the ground for tracks or plants or interesting rocks. They were staring, fixed, absorbed, looking at the ground or water beneath them as if something held their attention completely. I started counting. I created a coding system. I had research assistants review the same statements independently, without knowing what I was looking for. The numbers held. 41 cases in my database included witness accounts of the final moments before disappearance. In 34 of those cases, the witness mentioned that the person was looking down. 83%. That number is not random variation. That is a pattern. Something draws attention downward before people vanish. What follows are 7 cases, each documented in detail, each involving a witness to the final moments. I will present them as I originally encountered them, as individual disappearances with their own circumstances and evidence. The looking down detail will appear in each account, mentioned the way witnesses mentioned it, as one observation among many. By the 4th or 5th case, you may start noticing what I noticed. By the 7th, you will understand why I could not put down the files. Case 1. Olympic National Park, Washington, October 2016. Harold Mitchell, 63 years old, retired mechanical engineer from Tacoma. His wife filed a missing person report on October 19th after he failed to return from a solo backpacking trip along the Graves Creek Trail. Mitchell had been hiking Olympic National Park since 1974. His personal records documented over 400 trips across 42 years. He had walked every major trail in the park at least twice. His wife described him as methodical about planning, conservative about risk, obsessive about weather forecasts. The Graves Creek corridor was one of his regular routes. He had hiked it at least 15 times over 2 decades. He knew the trail, the campsites, the creek crossings, the sections that flooded in heavy rain. There was nothing about that route that could surprise him. He drove to the trailhead on October 17th and signed the permit register at 7:40 in the morning. Weather conditions were standard for October in the Olympics. Overcast, temperatures in the low 40s, no precipitation expected for the next 48 hours. He planned a 3-day trip. Camp the first night at 5 Mile Camp. Camp the second night at Elk Lake. Return on the third day. A route he had completed many times before. A group of 4 hikers heading outbound passed him approximately 3 miles from the trailhead around 9:30 that morning. One of the hikers, a woman named Sarah Palmer, provided the only witness account. She noticed Mitchell because he was standing still. Most hikers they passed were moving, heading in or out, focused on their destinations. Mitchell was stationary, positioned slightly off the main trail, his pack still on, his trekking poles planted in the dirt. He was looking at the ground, not the trail, the ground beside the trail, a section of forest floor carpeted with moss and fern and fallen needles from the canopy above. Palmer assumed he had spotted a mushroom or animal track. Hikers stopped for that sort of thing all the time. She called out good morning as they passed. Mitchell did not respond. He did not look up. He gave no indication he heard her. Her hiking partners were moving ahead, and she did not want to fall behind. She glanced back once and saw that Mitchell had not moved. Same position, same posture, same fixed attention on whatever he was seeing on the ground. She continued walking. That was the last confirmed sighting of Harold Mitchell. When he did not return on October 19th, his wife contacted park rangers. The search began October 20th. Rangers located his truck at the trailhead. They hiked the route he had planned, checking each campsite along the way. They found his camp at 5 Mile Camp, his planned first-night location. His tent was pitched correctly, the rainfly properly tensioned, the stakes driven at appropriate angles. His food was stored in the provided bear box. His stove and cooking gear were arranged on the flat rock he always used, according to his wife's description of his camp setup habits. His sleeping bag was unrolled inside the tent. His journal was beside the sleeping pad, open to an entry dated October 17th. The entry described an uneventful hike in, good conditions, plans for the next day. Standard trip documentation. His boots were inside the tent, placed at the foot of the sleeping pad. His pack was outside the tent, leaning against a Douglas fir approximately 10 feet away. Inside the pack, rangers found his map, compass, headlamp, first aid kit, and rain gear. Everything a hiker would need for the planned route. The camp showed no signs of disturbance, no indication of wildlife intrusion, human interference, or any event that would explain why Mitchell had left. But he had left. His boots in the tent, his gear in the pack, but Harold Mitchell gone. K-9 units arrived on October 21st. They tracked his scent from the tent to a small stream approximately 40 yards from camp. The stream ran perhaps 6 feet wide at that point, water flowing maybe 8 inches deep over rounded stones, clear enough to see the bottom perfectly. The scent ended at the water. Search teams gridded the surrounding forest in 100-yard intervals. They checked every drainage, hollow, and thicket within a 2-mile radius. Helicopter crews flew the river corridor looking for color that might indicate clothing or equipment. Dive teams searched the creek downstream to its confluence with the Quinault River. 12 days, 140 personnel, nothing recovered. Harold Mitchell remains missing. I interviewed Sarah Palmer approximately 2 years after the disappearance. Her memory of the encounter remained clear. She described Mitchell's posture as rigid. His head was tilted forward, not dramatically, but enough that she could not see his face as she passed. His attention was fixed on a point on the ground, maybe 2 or 3 feet in front of his boots. I asked what was there. What was he looking at? She paused before answering. She had thought about this many times since learning he was missing. Nothing, she told me. She had looked. Forest floor, moss, needles, a few sticks. Nothing that should hold anyone's attention like that. I asked if he had seemed distressed. She considered the question carefully. No, not distressed, not confused. He seemed focused, intensely focused, like someone studying something important. She mentioned that she almost stopped to ask if he was okay. Something about the stillness bothered her, but her companions were getting ahead, and Mitchell had not seemed to need help. He was just standing there, looking at the ground, just standing there, looking at the ground. Case 2, Shasta Trinity National Forest, California, July 2018. Marcus Hartley, 31 years old, civil engineer from Sacramento. His girlfriend reported him missing on July 23rd after he failed to return from a 3-day wilderness camping trip. Hartley was an experienced outdoorsman who had been backpacking in California wilderness since his college years. He had completed sections of the Pacific Crest Trail, climbed several peaks in the Sierra Nevada, and spent dozens of nights in backcountry across the state. His girlfriend described him as confident in wilderness, but not reckless. He drove to a trailhead in the Trinity Alps wilderness on July 20th. His plan was to hike to a remote lake where he had camped twice before, spend 2 nights fishing and relaxing, then hike out on the 22nd. The trail to the lake gained 3,000 feet over 6 miles, passing through old-growth forest before opening onto alpine meadows. The lake itself sat in a granite bowl beneath a series of peaks, accessible only by the single trail Hartley had taken. A pair of backpackers encountered him approximately 4 miles up the trail, around 2 in the afternoon on July 20th. One of them, a man named Aaron Foster, provided the witness statement. Turner noticed Hartley because of his position. Hartley was standing at the edge of a small stream that crossed the trail, not on the log bridge most hikers used, but downstream where the water pooled before continuing its descent. He was looking into the water, not drinking from it, not filtering it, not crossing it. Standing at the edge of the pool, his pack still on, his eyes fixed on the water. Turner assumed Hartley was watching fish or checking the depth. The pool was perhaps 3 feet deep at its center, clear water over a sandy bottom with a few scattered rocks, a pleasant spot to rest. He called out a greeting as they approached. Hartley did not respond. Turner's hiking partner commented that Hartley might have his earbuds in, might not be able to hear them. They passed without further interaction, continuing up the trail toward their own destination. Turner glanced back after they had gone maybe 50 feet. Hartley had not moved. Same position at the edge of the pool, same downward gaze into the water. That was the last confirmed sighting of Marcus Hartley. When his girlfriend reported him missing, rangers hiked to the lake where he had planned to camp. They found his tent on the north shore, pitched at a site he had used on previous trips. His sleeping bag was inside. His fishing rod was leaning against a nearby tree, still rigged with line and lure. His cooler sat in the shallows, keeping food cold in the mountain water. His camp was orderly. His gear was properly stored. His journal found in the tent contained entries through the evening of July 20th, documenting a good hike in clear weather, plans to fish the next morning. His boots were inside the tent. His day pack was on the shore approximately 30 yards from camp, near a section where the lakeshore sloped gently into the water. The pack contained his water bottle, some snacks, and his phone with a dead battery. K9 units tracked his scent from the camp to the lakeshore, then along the shore to where the day pack was found. The scent ended at the water. The lake measured approximately 800 feet across, with depths reaching perhaps 40 feet at center. Clear alpine water over granite bedrock. Dive teams searched it thoroughly over 3 days. They found nothing. Search teams covered the basin surrounding the lake. They checked every rock formation, every patch of brush, every root out of the bowl. They found nothing. 10 days, 86 personnel. No trace of Marcus Hartley. Hartley remains missing. I interviewed Aaron Foster approximately 18 months after the disappearance. He remembered the encounter clearly. He described Hartley as motionless, not the temporary stillness of someone pausing to rest, the stillness of someone completely absorbed in something. Hartley's head was angled down, his gaze fixed on the water, his body so still that Turner initially thought he might be a statue or a very realistic decoy. I asked what Hartley might have been looking at in the pool. Turner considered the question. The pool was unremarkable. Clear water, sandy bottom, a few rocks. Maybe some small fish, though he had not noticed any. Nothing that should command that kind of attention. I asked if Hartley had seemed to hear them when they passed. No, Turner told me. Hartley gave no indication he was aware of their presence. No twitch of recognition. No slight turn of the head. Nothing. It was like they did not exist for him. I asked how that had made Turner feel. He paused. Uncomfortable, he admitted. Something about the intensity of Hartley's focus felt wrong. Not dangerous wrong. Wrong in a way he could not articulate. He told me he had thought about that encounter many times since learning Hartley had vanished. He wondered if he should have said something more, done something to break Hartley's concentration. But what would he have said? The man was just standing at a stream, looking at the water. It was strange, but it was not alarming. Not alarming. Just a man looking at the water. Case 3. Gila National Forest, New Mexico. March 2019. Teresa Collins, 45 years old. High school biology teacher from Albuquerque. Her husband reported her missing on March 18th after she failed to return from a weekend solo hiking trip. Collins had been exploring the Gila wilderness for over a decade. She led student field trips to the area, wrote curriculum about southwestern ecosystems, and maintained a personal blog documenting her wilderness observations. Her husband described her as deeply knowledgeable about the terrain and genuinely passionate about the landscape. She drove to a trailhead on March 15th, planning a 2-night backpacking loop through a remote section of the wilderness. The route covered approximately 24 miles over varied terrain, forested ridges, grassy meadows, rocky canyons, and several stream crossings. She had completed similar routes many times. Weather conditions that weekend were mild, daytime temperatures in the 60s, nights dropping to the low 30s. No precipitation expected. Good conditions for spring hiking in the high desert. A local rancher named Robert Hayes encountered her on the afternoon of March 16th, approximately 8 miles from the trailhead. He was checking fence lines on grazing allotments that bordered the wilderness area. His presence in the area was not unusual, though most hikers he encountered were surprised to see him on horseback in such remote terrain. He noticed Collins because she was not moving. She was standing beside a dry wash, the kind of sandy stream bed that carried water only during monsoon season. The wash cut through the landscape maybe 10 feet wide and 5 feet deep, its bottom a mix of sand, gravel, and scattered rocks. She was looking into the wash, not at anything Hayes could see, just the empty stream bed. He rode closer, intending to ask if she needed assistance. Water sources were scarce in this section of the wilderness, and lost hikers sometimes mistook dry washes for active streams. He called out a greeting. She did not respond. He rode to within perhaps 20 feet and called out again, louder. She did not turn, did not acknowledge him, gave no sign she heard him at all. His horse became agitated as he approached closer. The animal refused to advance, tossing its head and stepping sideways. Hayes had ridden that horse for years and rarely saw it behave this way. He dismounted and approached on foot, leaving the horse ground-tied. When he reached the edge of the wash, he could see Collins clearly. She was standing approximately 10 feet down in the stream bed, her pack still on, her gaze fixed on the sand at her feet. He called to her a third time. No response. He climbed into the wash and walked toward her. When he touched her shoulder, she flinched and turned to look at him. Her expression was calm, but distant. She looked at him as if he were someone she vaguely recognized, but could not quite place. He asked if she was okay. She nodded slowly. He asked if she needed help. She shook her head. He asked what she was looking at. She turned back to the sand. She pointed at a spot approximately 2 feet in front of her boots. Right there, she told him. Hayes looked at the spot. He saw sand, fine desert sand with a few pebbles mixed in, animal tracks crossing from one side to the other. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that should hold anyone's attention. He asked what he should be seeing. She did not answer. She was looking at the sand again, her attention fixed on that same spot. Hayes decided she was probably suffering from heat exhaustion or dehydration, though she did not show obvious symptoms. He told her she should rest, drink water, get out of the sun. He offered to escort her back to the trailhead if she needed help. She turned to him and smiled. A genuine smile, warm and reassuring. She told him she was fine. She just needed a few minutes. She would be on her way soon. Something about her manner convinced him. She seemed lucid, calm, in control, not the behavior of someone in medical distress. He climbed out of the wash and returned to his horse. The animal was still nervous, still refusing to stand quietly. He mounted and rode along the fence line, completing his work. He looked back once as he rode away. She was still standing in the wash, still looking down at the sand. That was the last confirmed sighting of Teresa Collins. When her husband reported her missing, search teams hiked her planned route. They found evidence of her camps at both planned locations: tent impressions in the dirt, fire rings with recent ash, flattened grass where she had slept. They found her pack approximately 3 miles from where Hayes had seen her, at the edge of a different dry wash. The pack was propped against a mesquite tree. Her food, water, and gear were inside. Her journal contained entries through the morning of March 17th, describing good weather and plans to complete the loop that day. Her boots were beside the pack, placed neatly in the sand. No tracks led away from the pack. The sandy terrain should have held prints clearly, but the area around her gear showed no indication of which direction she had gone. Search teams covered the wash systems in every direction. They checked water sources, shade structures, anywhere a person might seek shelter. They found nothing. 8 days, 62 personnel. No trace of Teresa Collins. Collins remains missing. I interviewed Robert Hayes approximately 14 months after the disappearance. His account was detailed and consistent. He emphasized the stillness. She was standing so still, he told me, that he initially thought she might be injured, unable to move, paralyzed by a snake bite or a fall. But she was not injured. She was just still, completely still, looking at the sand. I asked about the spot where she had pointed. What was there? Nothing, he told me. Sand. He had looked carefully. There was nothing special about that particular section of stream bed. I asked about his horse's behavior. Why had the animal become agitated? Hayes did not have a good explanation. His horse was experienced, calm around hikers and wildlife. It rarely spooked, but something about approaching that wash had bothered the animal. He mentioned that he had ridden past that same wash many times since, checking the same fence lines. The horse never showed similar behavior. Whatever had disturbed it that day was not a permanent feature of the location. I asked if he had any theory about what Collins had been seeing. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he told me something he had not included in his original statement to investigators. He had looked at the sand where she pointed. He had seen nothing, but for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, he had felt something, a pull, an urge to keep looking, to look more closely, to find whatever she had found. Then his horse had called out, nervous and agitated, and the feeling had passed. He told me he did not look at the ground the same way anymore. He kept his eyes on the horizon when he rode. He did not let his attention settle on the earth beneath him. He was afraid of what he might see. Case 4. White Mountain National Forest, New Hampshire. August 2019. Leonard Crawford, 58 years old, retired professor of geology from Boston. His wife reported him missing on August 14th after he failed to return from a solo day hike in the Presidential Range. Crawford had been hiking the White Mountains since graduate school, nearly 30 years of experience on those trails. He had completed the Presidential Traverse multiple times, climbed every major peak, written academic papers on the geology of the range. His wife described him as more comfortable in the mountains than anywhere else. He drove to a trailhead near Pinkham Notch on August 12th, planning a single-day hike to a summit he had climbed dozens of times. The route was approximately 6 miles round trip with 2,000 feet of elevation gain, well within his abilities. He expected to be home by dinner. Weather conditions were favorable. Clear skies, temperatures in the 60s, light winds. One of the better August days the range had seen that summer. A pair of hikers descending from the summit encountered him approximately half a mile below the peak, around 1 in the afternoon. One of them, a woman named Diana Phillips, provided the witness statement. She noticed Crawford because of where he was standing, not on the trail, but off to the side, at the edge of a rocky outcrop that overlooked a steep talus field below. The terrain dropped away sharply from that point, loose rocks and boulders descending several hundred feet to the valley floor. He was looking down at the talus, not at the view, which was spectacular, not at the trail, which continued upward behind him, at the rocks directly below his feet, the jumbled mass of stone that filled the slope beneath the outcrop. Phillips assumed he was scouting a route or examining geological features. The White Mountains attracted geology enthusiasts, and this section of the range offered interesting formations. She called out a greeting as they approached. Crawford did not respond. Her hiking partner called out as well, louder. No response. They passed within 10 feet of him. He gave no indication he was aware of their presence. His attention remained fixed on the rocks below. Phillips paused after passing. Something about his stillness concerned her. She walked back and stood beside him, looking at the same view. She saw talus, gray and brown rocks, some the size of cars, some the size of fists, tumbled together in the chaotic pattern of 1,000 years of frost and gravity. Standard mountain terrain. Nothing unusual. She touched his arm and asked if he was okay. He turned slowly and looked at her. His expression was calm. His eyes were focused. He did not seem distressed or confused. He asked if she could see it. She asked what she should be looking for. He turned back to the talus without answering. He took a step toward the edge of the outcrop. Phillips grabbed his arm. The step would have taken him over the edge, onto a slope steep enough to be dangerous, loose enough to be unpredictable. He stopped. He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. He smiled, as if amused by something. Then he pulled free and stepped off the outcrop onto the talus slope below. Phillips watched him descend. He moved carefully, testing each foothold, navigating the loose rock with the skill of someone experienced in such terrain. His gaze never lifted from the rocks in front of him. She called after him, asking what he was doing, warning him about the danger. He did not respond. He continued down. Her hiking partner urged her to continue. They could not follow him onto that slope without proper equipment and experience. They could report the encounter when they reached the trailhead. Phillips watched until Crawford disappeared behind a large boulder approximately 200 feet below the outcrop. She never saw him emerge on the other side. She reported the encounter to rangers that evening. A search began the following morning. Teams descended the talus slope from multiple access points. They checked every boulder, every crevice, every location where a person might be trapped or injured. They found no trace of Crawford. They expanded the search to the valley below the slope. They checked streams, forests, trails. Nothing. They found his vehicle at the trailhead. They found his day pack at the base of the talus slope, approximately where Phillips estimated he had been heading. The pack was propped against a boulder. His water and food were inside. His phone was inside, battery at 40%. His hiking boots were beside the pack. No tracks led away from the pack. The surrounding terrain was rocky, not ideal for holding prints, but a person walking barefoot over that ground should have left some indication of direction. 11 days, 123 personnel. No trace of Leonard Crawford. Crawford remains missing. I interviewed Diana Phillips approximately 9 months after the disappearance. Her account was the most detailed of any witness I had spoken with. She had replayed the encounter many times in her mind. She remembered every detail. I asked what Crawford had been looking at on the talus slope. Rocks. She told me. Just rocks. She had looked carefully. There was nothing there. Nothing that should draw that kind of attention. I asked what he might have meant when he asked if she could see it. She did not know. She had wondered about that question ever since. See what? There was nothing to see. Just a slope covered in broken rock. I asked about his movement down the slope. How had he navigated terrain that would have been dangerous even for experienced scramblers? She described it as confident, not reckless, not hurried. He moved like someone who knew exactly where he was going, like someone following a path. But there was no path, just loose rock that could shift without warning, the kind of terrain that had killed experienced climbers. She mentioned that she had returned to that outcrop twice since the disappearance. She had stood where Crawford had stood and looked down at the talus. Both times she felt something, not a vision or a sound, a pull, an urge to look more closely, to find whatever Crawford had found, to follow where he had gone. Both times she had forced herself to step back and return to the trail. She told me she would not go back again. Something about that place frightened her. Something about the way the rocks seemed to wait. I asked what she meant by that. The rocks seemed to wait. She shook her head. She could not explain it. She only knew that when she looked down at that slope, she felt like something was looking back. She never saw what it was, but she was certain it was there. Case 5, Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, Minnesota, June 2020. Patricia Warren, 42 years old, pediatrician from Minneapolis. Her camping companions reported her missing on June 24th, after she failed to return from a solo paddle to a neighboring lake. Warren had been visiting the Boundary Waters since childhood, first with her family, and later with her own camping groups. She estimated she had spent over 200 nights in the wilderness area across 30 years. Her companions described her as an expert paddler and confident solo traveler who regularly took short trips away from group camps for solitude and photography. The group had established a base camp on a lake, accessible by a moderate portage from a popular entry point. On the morning of June 23rd, Warren announced she would paddle to a smaller lake, connected by a short channel, spend the day photographing birds, and return by evening. She loaded her camera equipment, some food, and extra water into her canoe. She left around 7 in the morning, waving to her companions as she paddled toward the channel. A fishing guide named Kevin Baker was working with clients on the smaller lake that afternoon. His permit allowed motorized access from a different entry point, bringing clients to remote waters most paddlers could not easily reach. He noticed Warren around 2 in the afternoon. She had beached her canoe on a rocky point and was standing at the water's edge, not paddling, not photographing, not moving. She was looking into the water. Baker assumed she had spotted fish or was checking depth before wading. Photographers sometimes walked into shallow water for better angles. He turned his attention back to his clients. When he looked again, perhaps 20 minutes later, she had not moved. Same position at the water's edge, same downward gaze into the lake. He motored closer, concerned she might be in medical distress. As he approached, he could see her clearly. She was standing in perhaps 6 inches of water, the lake lapping gently around her bare feet. Her hiking boots were on the shore behind her. Her eyes were fixed on the water at her feet. He cut the motor and called out, asking if she needed assistance. She did not respond. He drifted closer, repeating his question. She gave no sign she heard him. He turned to his clients, explaining he needed to check on the woman. One of them, an experienced wilderness traveler, suggested she might be having a diabetic episode or similar medical emergency. They agreed to approach. Baker beached his boat on the point and walked to where Warren was standing. He touched her shoulder and asked if she was okay. She turned her head slowly and looked at him. Her expression was peaceful. Her eyes were clear and focused. She did not seem confused or distressed. She asked if he could see it moving. Baker looked at the water. He saw clear lake water over a sandy bottom scattered with small rocks. Perhaps 3 feet deep at that point, visibility extending to the bottom easily, minnows darting in small schools, a crayfish backing into a crevice between rocks. He asked what was moving. She turned back to the water without answering, her attention fixed on a point approximately 2 feet in front of her, where the water was maybe 10 inches deep. Baker looked at that spot. He saw nothing unusual. Sand, pebbles, the same clear water as everywhere else. He tried again to engage her, asking her name, where she was camping, whether she had companions expecting her. She did not respond to any of his questions. His clients were calling from the boat, asking if everything was okay. He was aware of time passing, of responsibilities to people who had paid for his services. He made a decision that would haunt him afterward. He told Warren that help was available if she needed it. that she should paddle back to wherever her companions were waiting. Then he returned to his boat and continued guiding. He looked back several times as he motored away. She remained standing in the shallows, motionless, looking down at the water. That was the last confirmed sighting of Patricia Warren. When she failed to return to camp by nightfall, her companions paddled to the smaller lake to search. They found her canoe beached on the rocky point. They found her camera bag and day pack in the canoe. They found her boots on the shore at the water's edge. They did not find Patricia. Search teams covered the lake and surrounding portage routes. They checked every island, every campsite, every section of shoreline. Dive teams searched the water near the rocky point, expanding outward in systematic grids. The lake was shallow, rarely exceeding 20 feet in depth. Clear water over sandy bottom. Every square foot of that lake bed was visible to searchers. They found nothing. 9 days, 74 personnel. No trace of Patricia Warren. Warren remains missing. I interviewed Kevin Baker approximately 8 months after the disappearance. His guilt was evident throughout our conversation. He believed he should have done more, stayed longer, insisted on accompanying her back to her companions. I asked what Warren had been looking at in the water. He shook his head. Nothing. Clear water over sand and rocks. He had looked carefully. There was nothing there. I asked what she might have meant by something moving. He did not know. The water was still except for small fish and the natural current near shore. Nothing was moving in any unusual way. I asked how she had seemed when she turned and looked at him. He paused before answering. Peaceful, he repeated. That was the word that stayed with him. She had looked peaceful, not frightened, not confused, not in distress. She had looked like someone who had found something wonderful in clear water over an ordinary sandy bottom. He mentioned that he had returned to that rocky point several times since. He had stood where Warren stood. He had looked at the water. He never saw anything, but he admitted that each time he visited, he found it harder to look away. The water drew his attention. It held his gaze. He did not go there anymore. The pull was too strong. Case 6, Nantahala National Forest, North Carolina. September 2021. Eric Sullivan, 37 years old, software developer from Atlanta. His wife reported him missing on September 20th after he failed to return from a long weekend backpacking trip. Sullivan had been backpacking in the southern Appalachians for 15 years, since his college days at Georgia Tech. His wife described him as methodical about trip planning, but adventurous about destinations, always seeking new trails and overlooked wilderness. He drove to a trailhead in the Nantahala on September 17th, planning a 3-night loop through a remote section of the forest. The route covered approximately 35 miles over varied terrain, including several ridge crossings and numerous stream fords. He expected to be home by the evening of September 20th. A thru-hiker on the Appalachian Trail encountered him on September 18th, approximately 2 miles off the main trail on a connector path that led to the loop Sullivan was hiking. The thru-hiker, a woman named Sandra Powell, was taking a side trip to resupply at a small town accessible from Sullivan's route. She noticed Sullivan because of his position. He was standing at a creek crossing, not on the rocks most hikers use to keep their feet dry, but in the water itself. Calf deep, the stream flowing around his legs, his pack still on his back. He was looking down at the creek bottom. Crawford assumed he had dropped something. A trekking pole, maybe, or a piece of gear that had slipped from his pack. She had done similar creek bottom searches herself when equipment escaped. She called out, asking if he needed help finding something. He did not respond. She approached the creek and repeated her question. He gave no indication he heard her. She waded into the water, the cold shocking her legs, and moved to stand beside him. From that position, she could see what he was seeing. Creek water flowing over rounded rocks, scattered gravel between them, the occasional leaf or twig tumbling past in the current. Nothing else. Nothing that should hold anyone's attention. She touched his arm. He flinched, but did not turn. She moved in front of him, blocking his view of the water, forcing him to acknowledge her presence. He looked at her with an expression she described as annoyed, like someone interrupted during an important conversation. She asked if he was okay. He nodded. She asked what he was looking at. He glanced past her, at the water behind her, then back at her face. He told her he was fine. He just needed another minute. Something had caught his attention. She stepped aside, not sure what else to do. He was lucid, communicative, not showing signs of medical emergency. He was just standing in a creek, looking at the water. She asked what had caught his attention. He did not answer. He was looking at the creek again, his gaze fixed on a point approximately 3 feet away, where the water ran maybe 8 inches deep over a bed of small stones. Crawford decided he was probably fine, maybe a nature enthusiast who had spotted an interesting fish or aquatic insect. She wished him well and continued toward town. That was the last confirmed sighting of Eric Sullivan. When his wife reported him missing, search teams hiked his planned route. They found evidence of his camps at 2 of 3 planned locations. They found his tent at the 3rd location, the night before he should have hiked out. The tent was properly pitched near a small stream. His sleeping bag was inside. His food was properly hung from a bear line. His journal contained entries through the evening of September 19th, describing good weather and plans to complete the loop the following day. His pack was found approximately 200 yards from the tent, at the edge of the stream. His gear was inside. His phone was inside, battery dead. His boots were beside the pack. Canine units tracked his scent from the tent to the pack, then into the stream. The scent ended in the water. The stream measured perhaps 12 feet wide at that point, flowing over rocks and gravel, rarely deeper than 2 feet, even in the main channel. Search teams walked every foot of it, upstream and downstream for miles. They checked log jams, undercut banks, every feature that might conceal a body. They found nothing. 10 days, 89 personnel, no trace of Eric Sullivan. Sullivan remains missing. I interviewed Sandra Powell approximately 6 months after the disappearance. She had completed her through hike and returned to regular life, but the encounter stayed with her. She described Sullivan's focus as absolute. When he looked at the water, nothing else existed for him. She had stood right next to him, touched his arm, spoken directly to him. She might as well have been invisible. I asked what he could have been seeing in the creek. She had no answer. She had looked at the same water. She saw nothing unusual. I asked about the moment when she stepped in front of him. He had looked annoyed, she told me, like she was interrupting something. Interrupting what? I asked. She did not know. A conversation she had thought at the time. But with whom? There was no one else there. Just the 2 of them and the creek. She mentioned something she had not included in her original statement. When Sullivan had glanced past her at the water, his eyes had tracked something, followed a movement. She had turned to look. She had seen nothing moving, but his eyes had followed it. Whatever he was seeing, it had been real to him, real enough to track its movement through the water. She told me she avoided creeks now when she hiked. She crossed on rocks or logs, never waiting. She kept her eyes on the far bank, not the water beneath her feet. She was afraid of what she might see if she looked too closely. Case 7. Glacier National Park, Montana, July 2022. Catherine Bennett, 53 years old, veterinarian from Spokane. Her husband reported her missing on July 19th after she failed to return from a day hike to one of the park's alpine lakes. Bennett had been visiting Glacier since childhood, first with her parents and later with her own family. She estimated she had hiked every named trail in the park at least once, some of them dozens of times. Her husband described her as deeply connected to the landscape, someone who felt more at home in the mountains than anywhere else. She drove to a trailhead on July 17th, planning a solo day hike to a glacial lake approximately 6 miles from the parking area. The route gained 2,000 feet through old-growth forest before opening onto alpine meadows, with the lake nestled in a cirque beneath towering cliffs. She had made this particular hike at least 10 times over the past decade. Weather conditions were excellent. Clear skies, temperatures in the mid-60s, light winds. One of the better July days the park had seen that summer. A ranger conducting trail survey encountered her approximately 1 mile from the lake, around 11 in the morning. The ranger, Michael Reed, was documenting trail conditions for maintenance planning and taking photographs of erosion points that needed attention. He noticed Bennett because she was not on the trail. She was standing approximately 20 feet off the main path, at the edge of a small tarn that most hikers walked past without notice. The tarn was perhaps 15 feet across, fed by snowmelt, crystal clear water over a rocky bottom. She was looking into the water. Reed assumed she was photographing something or checking the clarity. Photographers often stopped at the smaller tarns, which offered reflections without the crowds of the main destinations. He called out a greeting. She did not respond. He walked toward her, intending to check on her condition. As he approached, he could see her clearly. She was standing with her boots perhaps 6 inches from the water's edge, her daypack still on, her head tilted forward, her attention fixed on the tarn. He announced himself again, identifying himself as a park ranger. She did not turn. He reached her side and looked at the tarn. Clear water over rocks, perhaps 4 feet deep at center, the bottom visible everywhere. Some aquatic plants growing near the edges. A few small insects skating on the surface. Nothing unusual. Nothing that should command such attention. He touched her shoulder. She turned slowly and looked at him. Her expression was calm, her eyes clear and focused. He asked if she was okay. She nodded. He asked what she was looking at. She turned back to the tarn. "It's beautiful," she told him. "The way it moves." Reed looked at the water. It was still. Mountain tarns above the wind line were often perfectly still, their surfaces like mirrors reflecting the peaks above. He asked what was moving. She pointed at a spot approximately 3 feet from shore, where the water was maybe 2 feet deep. "Right there," she told him. "Can you see it?" Reed looked at the spot. He saw the same thing he saw everywhere else in the tarn. Clear water over rocks. Nothing moving. He was about to ask her to elaborate when his radio crackled. Another ranger needed assistance with a medical emergency several miles away. Reed had to go. He told Bennett to be careful, to make sure she returned before dark, to check in at the ranger station if she had any concerns. She nodded without looking at him. Her attention already returned to the water. He hurried away to help with the emergency. A hiker who had twisted an ankle badly and needed evacuation assistance. By the time the situation was resolved, several hours had passed. He did not think about Bennett again until he heard she had been reported missing. The search began on July 18th. Rangers hiked to the lake where Bennett had planned to spend her day. They found no sign she had ever reached it. They backtracked the trail, checking every turnoff and side path. They found the small tarn where Reed had encountered her. They found her daypack on the shore, propped against a rock. Her water and food were inside. Her phone was inside, battery at 60%. Her boots were at the water's edge. Canine units tracked her scent from the trail to the tarn, circling the small body of water, ending at the spot where her boots were found. The scent did not continue beyond the tarn. Dive teams searched the tarn. It took less than an hour. The water was shallow, clear, and small. Every inch of the bottom was visible and accessible. They found nothing. Search teams expanded outward, covering the meadows and forests surrounding the tarn. They checked the main trail, the lake, the routes Bennett might have taken if she changed her plans. 12 days, 137 personnel. No trace of Catherine Bennett. Bennett remains missing. I interviewed Michael Reed approximately 3 months after the disappearance. As a ranger, he had participated in the search operations and felt the weight of the outcome personally. He returned to our conversation repeatedly, to the moment when Bennett had said the water was moving. Beautiful, she had called it. The way it moves. The water was still, Reed told me. He had looked at the exact spot she indicated. There was no movement. I asked if anything about the tarn seemed unusual when he stood beside it. He paused before answering. He had not mentioned this to anyone else, he told me. When he looked at the water where she was pointing, he felt something, a sensation in his chest, like a tightening, an urge to look more closely, to lean toward the surface, to see what she was seeing. The radio call had broken the moment. He had to leave, had to attend to the emergency, but he remembered the feeling. He had walked past that tarn many times since, surveying trails, checking conditions. He never stopped anymore. He kept his eyes on the path and walked quickly past. I asked what he was afraid of. He did not answer directly. He told me that sometimes, in the moment before sleep, he saw the tarn in his mind. Still water over rocks, clear and cold, and sometimes, just at the edge of perception, he saw movement beneath the surface. Something turning, something rising. He always opened his eyes before he could see what it was. I have presented these 7 cases as I encountered them. Individual disappearances, separated by years and thousands of miles, each with its own circumstances and evidence. But you may have noticed something. In every case, the witness described the same behavior. The missing person was looking down, at the ground, at water, at something beneath the surface that the witness could not see. Harold Mitchell stood motionless on a trail, staring at the forest floor. Marcus Hartley stood at a stream pool, gazing into the water. Teresa Collins knelt in a dry wash, examining the sand. Leonard Crawford stood at the edge of a talus slope, fixed on the rocks below. Patricia Warren stood in shallow lake water, watching something move. Eric Sullivan stood in a creek, tracking something with his eyes. Catherine Bennett stood at a tarn, seeing beauty in stillness. 7 witnesses, 7 accounts of intense downward focus, 7 people who walked toward water and never returned. After completing these interviews, I went back through my entire database. Every case file with a witness statement, every account of a final sighting. I read them all, looking for any mention of the missing person's behavior, their posture, the direction of their attention. The results were consistent beyond anything I had expected. 41 cases in my database include witness accounts of the final moments before disappearance. In 34 of those cases, the witness mentioned that the missing person was looking down. 34 out of 41, 83%. That number is not coincidence. It is not observer bias. It is not the result of witnesses remembering selectively or investigators asking leading questions. I verified the number multiple ways. I had independent researchers code the same statements without knowing what pattern I was looking for. I checked for interviewer effects, for confirmation bias, for any methodological issue that might explain the result. The number held, 83%. Something draws attention downward before people vanish. The witnesses saw nothing where the missing people were looking. Forest floor, stream bottom, lake surface, rocks and sand, and still water. Ordinary terrain that millions of people pass without incident. But the missing people saw something. Their focus was too intense to be random. Their stillness was too complete to be casual observation. They were not glancing at the ground. They were not checking their footing. They were staring, fixed, absorbed. They were seeing something that held their attention completely. In several cases, the missing person indicated awareness of what they were seeing. Teresa Collins pointed at the sand and told the rancher something was right there. Leonard Crawford asked the hiker if she could see it. Patricia Warren asked the fishing guide if he could see it moving. Catherine Bennett told the ranger the water was beautiful, described how it moved. They were seeing something real to them, something invisible to everyone else. What was it? I do not know. The witnesses did not know. The missing people did not return to explain. The search operations in these cases followed professional protocols. Rangers, rescue teams, K-9 units, dive teams. Hundreds of personnel across thousands of hours. They searched systematically, thoroughly, competently. They found almost nothing. In Mitchell's case, the Olympic search covered 200 square miles over 12 days. Ground teams gridded the terrain in 100-yard intervals, checking every drainage and thicket and hollow log. Helicopter crews flew the Hoh River corridor at low altitude, looking for any flash of color that might indicate clothing or equipment. Dive teams searched the river and its tributaries. The creek near his camp ran 6 feet wide and 8 inches deep. Search teams walked its entire length, checking every pool and riffle and undercut bank. The water was clear enough to see individual pebbles on the bottom. There was nowhere in that creek for a person to hide, nowhere for a body to be concealed. Yet his scent ended there, and he was never found. In Hartley's case, the Trinity Alps search covered the lake basin and surrounding terrain for 10 days. The lake itself was searched by dive teams working in overlapping grids, covering every square foot of the 40-foot deep water. Clear alpine water, granite bedrock visible through the entire water column. No caves, no crevices, no features that could conceal a body. He had walked to the edge of that lake and ceased to exist anywhere that could be searched. In Collins's case, the Gila search covered wash systems and surrounding desert for 8 days. The dry stream beds where her scent ended held no water, no vegetation, nothing but sand and rocks baking in the desert sun. Her tracks led to her pack and stopped. The sand beyond was undisturbed. She had walked to that spot and then simply was not anywhere the tracks continued. In Crawford's case, the White Mountain search focused on the talus field where he had last been seen descending. Teams worked the slope systematically, checking every boulder and crevice, every space large enough to trap a fallen climber. The slope was dangerous, but not mysterious. Rocks piled on rocks, the debris of geological processes operating over millennia. A person descending that slope would leave marks, would dislodge stones, would be visible from above until they reached the valley floor. He had descended and vanished. No marks on the rocks, no displaced stones, no body in the valley below. In Warren's case, the Boundary Waters search covered the lake and surrounding portage routes. The lake was shallow throughout, rarely exceeding 20 feet, with visibility to the bottom in every section. She had walked into ankle-deep water and never walked out. Search teams covered every inch of that lake bed. She was not there. In Sullivan's case, the Nantahala search followed the stream where his scent ended. Teams walked both banks, checking log jams and undercut banks, and every feature that might hold a body. The stream was clear, cold, visible to the bottom. A person entering that water would leave evidence, would be found downstream, would be somewhere. He was not somewhere. He was nowhere. In Bennett's case, the glacier search focused on the tarn where she was last seen. The water was 15 feet across and 4 feet deep at center. Dive teams searched it completely in less than an hour. Clear mountain water over rocks. She was not there. She was not anywhere within 12 days of searching by 137 personnel. The standard explanations do not fit. Medical emergency does not explain the consistent behavior. 7 people in 7 different parks did not simultaneously experience strokes or seizures that caused them to stare at the ground before walking into water. Predator attack does not explain the evidence patterns. Large predators leave signs: blood, drag marks, scattered equipment. 7 people were not consumed completely by 7 different predators in 7 different ecosystems without leaving any trace. Suicide does not explain the witness accounts. People planning to end their lives do not typically pause to examine the ground with intense focus, respond to witnesses with calm denials of distress, then walk into water that could not conceal their bodies. Voluntary disappearance does not explain the consistency. 7 people did not independently decide to fake their deaths using identical methods, leave their boots at water's edge, and vanish without trace. What fits the evidence is what the evidence shows. 7 people saw something that drew their attention downward, something invisible to the witnesses who stood beside them, something that commanded complete focus. Then they walked toward water, removed their boots, entered the water, and disappeared from any place that could be searched. I have spoken with experts in various fields: neurologists, psychologists, search and rescue specialists, forensic investigators. None can explain the pattern. A neurologist suggested dissociative episodes. Extreme stress can cause people to disconnect from surroundings, become fixated on random stimuli, but the missing people did not seem stressed. Witnesses described them as calm, focused, peaceful. A psychologist suggested mass hysteria. Shared cultural beliefs can cause similar symptoms across unconnected individuals. But these 7 people had no connection, no shared background, no common media exposure, no cultural factors that might produce identical symptoms. A search specialist suggested we are simply missing something. The bodies are there, in the water or nearby, and searches failed to locate them. But these were professional searches with trained teams and proper equipment. 7 consecutive failures to find anything in searchable terrain strains credibility. No expert could offer an explanation that fit all the evidence. The pattern remains unexplained. I have thought about what the missing people might have been seeing. The witnesses consistently reported that there was nothing unusual at the spots that drew attention. Forest floor, creek bottom, sandy wash, talus slope, lake water. Ordinary surfaces over ordinary substrates. But ordinary to whom? Ordinary according to what perceptual abilities? Human vision is limited. We see a narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum, missing infrared and ultraviolet, and everything beyond. We perceive the world through brains that evolved for specific purposes, filtering information according to priorities established over millions of years of evolution. What might be visible that we do not normally see? What might be present in the ground or water that our perception filters out as irrelevant? I do not know. This is speculation, not evidence. But the consistency of the pattern demands some explanation. 34 people looked down at ordinary surfaces and saw something there. Something important enough to hold their complete attention. Something compelling enough to make them walk toward water and not return. They were not delusional. The witnesses described them as lucid, responsive when engaged, capable of normal speech and movement. Whatever they were seeing, it was real enough to them to provoke consistent behavior. Maybe some people can see things others cannot. Maybe certain conditions, certain locations, certain states of mind make visible what is normally hidden. Maybe the missing people had crossed a threshold of perception that allowed them to see what we cannot. This is not a scientific hypothesis. It is an attempt to make sense of evidence that defies conventional explanation. The alternative is that 34 people, across decades and thousands of miles, independently experienced identical hallucinations that caused identical behaviors leading to identical outcomes. That explanation requires coincidence on a scale that strains belief. Something is there, something beneath the surface, something that occasionally becomes visible. The witnesses did not see it. The search teams did not find it. The evidence does not reveal what it is, but the missing people saw it. Their behavior proves that. They saw something beautiful enough, compelling enough to follow, and they followed it somewhere we cannot go. I want to address the boots. In every case, the missing person removed their footwear before entering the water. Their boots were found at the water's edge, placed carefully, positioned as if the person expected to return for them. This detail recurs across unconnected cases spanning decades and thousands of miles. People do not accidentally behave identically. Something about the phenomenon causes this specific behavior. One interpretation is practical. People remove shoes before wading into water to keep them dry. The boots are left behind because the person intends to retrieve them after crossing. But they did not cross. They did not return. And the water in most cases was too shallow and clear to conceal a crossing gone wrong. Another interpretation is ritualistic. Removing footwear before entering sacred or significant space appears in many cultural traditions. Perhaps whatever the missing people were seeing required bare feet. Perhaps the act of removing boots was a preparation for where they were going. I do not know which interpretation is correct. I do not know if either interpretation captures the truth. I know only that the behavior is consistent. 34 people removed their boots and entered water and never came back. I want to address what witnesses experienced when they tried to see what the missing people saw. Several witnesses reported feeling something when they looked at the same spot. A pull, an urge to look more closely, a tightening in the chest or gut. Robert Hayes, who encountered Teresa Collins in the dry wash, described feeling an urge to keep looking, to find what she had found. Then his horse called out, breaking the moment. Diana Phillips, who encountered Leonard Crawford at the Talus Slope, returned to that outcrop twice after the disappearance. Both times she felt a pull, an urge to look more closely. Both times she forced herself to step back. Kevin Baker, who encountered Patricia Warren in the Boundary Waters, returned to the rocky point several times. He found it harder to look away each time. He stopped going. Michael Reed, who encountered Catherine Bennett at the Tarn, felt a tightening in his chest when he looked where she was pointing. He sees the Tarn in his mind before sleep sometimes, and he opens his eyes before he can see what moves beneath the surface. These witnesses did not see what the missing people saw, but they felt something. An attraction. A pull toward perception. Maybe that pull is the first stage of the phenomenon. Maybe prolonged exposure, longer attention, would have allowed them to see what they felt. Maybe looking away is what saved them. I have wondered about this. If the witnesses had not been interrupted, if they had kept looking, if they had allowed the pull to draw them closer, would they have seen it? Would they have followed? Would they be missing too? I do not know. The witnesses escaped by chance. A horse calling out, a radio crackling, companions moving ahead, random interruptions that broke the moment and allowed them to walk away. The missing people were not interrupted. They kept looking. They saw something, and then they were gone. I have visited several of the locations where these disappearances occurred. I wanted to see the terrain. I wanted to understand what drew the missing people's attention. I wanted to test myself against whatever might be there. I stood at the creek crossing near Harold Mitchell's camp. The water ran clear and cold over rounded stones, exactly as search reports described. The forest canopy filtered light into green shadows. Moss covered everything. The silence was complete, except for the sound of water. I looked at the creek. I looked at the forest floor where Sarah Palmer saw Mitchell standing. I looked for anything unusual, any feature that might explain why someone would stop and stare. I saw nothing. Forest floor and creek water. Ordinary terrain. But I noticed something about my own attention. The longer I stood there, the harder it became to look away. My gaze kept returning to the water, to the way light played on the surface, to the darkness beneath the clarity. I made myself turn and walk back to the trail. The effort required surprised me. I stood at the talus slope below the outcrop where Leonard Crawford had descended. The rocks tumbled down the mountainside in frozen chaos. Gray granite and brown lichen, shadows between the boulders. I did not climb down. The terrain was beyond my skill level, and I was alone. But I looked. I stood where Diana Phillips had stood and looked down at the slope. I saw rocks, thousands of them, tumbled together in patterns that almost suggested shapes, shadows that almost suggested depths beyond the physical space they occupied. I understood why Phillips had dreamed about that slope. The terrain invited perception. The patterns suggested presence. The longer I looked, the more I saw shapes that might have been something other than random stone. I turned away. The shapes dissolved into ordinary rock. I stood at the tarn where Michael Reed had encountered Catherine Bennett. The water was perfectly still, a mirror reflecting the peaks above. Approximately 15 feet across, shallow enough to see the bottom everywhere. I looked at the spot where Bennett had been looking. I saw clear water over rocks. Nothing moving, but I felt something. The sensation Reed had described. A tightening in my chest. An urge to lean closer, to see what was beneath the surface. I stepped back. I walked to the trail and continued down the mountain without looking back. I have tested myself, and I have retreated. I have approached the phenomenon and withdrawn before seeing whatever there is to see. Maybe there is nothing to see. Maybe the pull I felt was suggestion, the power of the stories I carry affecting my perception. But the missing people were not carrying those stories. They approached those places without the context I have. They looked at ordinary ground and ordinary water and saw something there. They saw it. They followed it. They did not come back. I do not know if I would come back. That is why I retreated. That is why I will not look too closely. The families of the missing have processed their grief in different ways. Harold Mitchell's wife sold their home in Tacoma and moved to the desert. She could not live near the Olympics anymore, could not see the mountains where her husband had vanished. She told me she had accepted that she would never know what happened. Some mysteries do not resolve. Not. Marcus Hartley's girlfriend eventually married someone else. She felt guilty about moving on, but also felt she had no choice. Life demanded continuation. She kept a photograph of Hartley on her desk, a reminder of someone she had loved who had walked into clear water and never walked out. Teresa Collins's husband still lived in Albuquerque, but never returned to the Gila. The wilderness he had shared with his wife for decades became territory he could not enter. Too many trails held her memory. Too many places reminded him of what was lost. Leonard Crawford's wife donated his geological equipment to his university and established a scholarship in his name. She channeled her grief into legacy, ensuring his work would continue, even though he could not. Patricia Warren's camping companions scattered after her disappearance. The group that had traveled together for years could not bear to reassemble. Every gathering would hold an empty space where she should have been. Eric Sullivan's wife moved to a city with no wilderness nearby. She could not be close to forests or streams anymore. The natural world she had once loved now held only threat. Catherine Bennett's husband still visited Glacier, still hiked the trails she had loved. He told me he felt closest to her in the mountains, even though the mountains had taken her, or perhaps because they had. She belonged to them now. Each family found their own way to carry the weight. None found answers. None achieved closure in the traditional sense. They learned to live with questions that would never be answered. What did their loved ones see? Where did they go? Why them? I cannot answer these questions. I can only document that the questions connect. That people who vanish share characteristics we did not recognize until someone started looking for them. That the profile of the missing is not random, but patterned. I want to present the numbers clearly. I have reviewed over 400 wilderness disappearance cases in my database. These are cases where conventional explanations do not fit. Cases where professional searches found nothing. Cases where people walked into wilderness and ceased to exist anywhere that could be found. Of these 400 cases, 41 include witness accounts of the final moments before disappearance. Someone saw the missing person shortly before they vanished. In 34 of those 41 cases, the witness mentioned that the missing person was looking down. 83%. Not looking ahead at the trail. Not looking around at the scenery. Not looking up at the sky or trees or mountains. Looking down. At the ground. At water. At something beneath the surface. This is the pattern. This is what connects the cases. This is what I found in the files after 300 reports made my hands shake. I verified the number multiple times. I had independent researchers review the same evidence without knowing what pattern I was seeking. The number held. Something draws attention downward. Something holds that attention with complete focus. Something leads people toward water and somewhere beyond. What is it? I do not know. The witnesses did not see it. They stood beside the missing people and looked at the same spots. They saw nothing unusual. The search teams did not find it. They covered the terrain systematically, searching every accessible location. They found only boots and packs and the end of scent trails. The missing people did not return to explain. Whatever they saw, wherever they went, they did not come back to tell us. I can describe the pattern. I cannot explain the cause, but I can tell you this. If you find yourself in wilderness, if you find your attention drawn downward, if you find yourself staring at the ground or water with an intensity you cannot explain, look away. Do not linger. Do not lean closer. Do not try to see what you feel pulling at your attention. Turn around. Walk back to the trail. Return to the trailhead. Go home. Because 34 people did not look away. They kept looking. They saw something. And whatever they saw led them somewhere they could not return from. I do not know what they were looking down at. I do not know where they went. I know only that they looked, that they saw, that they followed, and that they never came back. 34 out of 41, 83%. They were looking down. Now you know what that detail means. What you do with this information is up to you. The methodology behind this investigation requires explanation. How does one find a pattern that no one else has noticed? How does one verify that the pattern is real and not an artifact of selective attention? I began with simple case collection. Missing persons reports from national parks and forests, incident summaries from search and rescue operations, news archives documenting wilderness disappearances, family interviews conducted in the years following each case. The collection criteria were straightforward. Cases where searches found no body. Cases where evidence did not support conventional explanations. Cases where professional teams covered appropriate terrain and recovered nothing. This gave me a database of over 400 cases spanning 6 decades. The earliest case dated to 1967. The most recent occurred within the past 18 months. Geographic distribution covered every region of the continental United States. Initial analysis looked for geographic clusters. If something about certain locations caused disappearances, the cases should concentrate in specific areas. But the distribution was essentially random. Cases scattered across every state with significant wilderness, proportional roughly to visitation patterns. I looked for seasonal patterns. If environmental conditions caused disappearances, certain times of year should show elevated rates. But the distribution across seasons reflected normal visitation patterns. More cases in summer, because more people visited wilderness in summer. Rates per visitor remained consistent year-round. I looked for demographic patterns. If certain types of people were vulnerable to whatever caused these disappearances, the missing should share characteristics. But the demographics spanned all ages, genders, experience levels, and backgrounds. No clear victim profile emerged. I looked for terrain patterns. If certain landscape features created hazards that swallowed people without trace, the disappearances should cluster in similar terrain. But cases occurred in every type of environment. Mountains and deserts and forests and lake shores, technical climbing terrain and easy walking paths. Standard investigative approaches yielded nothing. The cases seemed genuinely random, tragic events without connecting factors. Then I began reading the witness statements more carefully. Approximately 90% of wilderness disappearances occur without witnesses. The missing person is alone when whatever happens to them occurs. We have evidence of their presence, their gear, their final known locations. We do not have observations of their final moments. But in approximately 10% of cases, someone saw the missing person shortly before they vanished. A passing hiker, a fellow camper, a ranger on patrol, someone who encountered them and later reported that encounter to investigators. I had read these statements before, extracting standard information. Direction of travel, physical condition, emotional state, gear and equipment, the practical details that might help searchers locate someone. I had not analyzed the behavioral details, what the missing person was doing when observed, how they were standing, where they were looking. When I went back through the files with this new focus, the pattern emerged immediately. In case after case, witnesses described the missing person as looking down, standing still, attention fixed on the ground or water beneath them, not moving, not responding to greetings or questions, absorbed completely in whatever they were seeing. I created a coding system to categorize the statements objectively. Each witness account was evaluated for the direction of the missing person's gaze, rated on a scale from clearly upward to clearly downward, with neutral options for ambiguous or unspecified cases. I trained 2 research assistants to apply the coding system independently. They reviewed the same 41 witness statements without knowing what pattern I was investigating. Their coding matched mine with 97% agreement. The numbers were stark. Cases where witness described missing person looking up, 0. Cases where witness described missing person looking ahead, 4. Cases where witness described missing person looking around, 3. Cases where witness described missing person looking down, 34. 83%. I tested for interviewer effects. Had the original investigators asked leading questions that prompted witnesses to mention downward gaze? But the original interviews used standard protocols without any specific focus on gaze direction. Witnesses mentioned looking down because it struck them as notable, not because they were asked about it. I tested for selection bias. Were cases with looking down witnesses more likely to remain unsolved and enter my database? But case resolution rates showed no correlation with witness statement content. Solved and unsolved cases had similar rates of witness accounts. I tested for publication bias. Were cases with unusual witness statements more likely to be reported and thus more likely to enter my database? But my collection methods drew primarily on official records, not media accounts. The database reflected reported disappearances, not publicized ones. Every test supported the same conclusion. The looking down pattern was real. It existed in the data independent of collection or analysis methods. It connected cases across decades and thousands of miles. Something draws attention downward before people vanish. The pattern demanded further investigation. I began interviewing witnesses directly. The case files contained initial statements, but I wanted to explore the details more deeply. What exactly had the witnesses seen? What had they felt? What did they remember years later? The interviews revealed consistencies beyond the basic looking down observation. Witnesses consistently described the missing person as motionless, not pausing to rest or check equipment, not shifting weight or adjusting position, completely still, as if they had forgotten how to move. Witnesses consistently described the missing person as unresponsive. Greetings went unanswered. Questions prompted no reply. Direct address produced no acknowledgement. The missing people seemed unaware that anyone else was present. Witnesses consistently described the missing person's focus as intense, not casual observation, but complete absorption, the kind of attention usually reserved for emergencies or fascinating discoveries. Except there was nothing visible to warrant such focus. Witnesses consistently felt something was wrong. They described discomfort, unease, a sense that they should do something but could not identify what. Several used the word strange. Several used the word off. None could articulate the source of their discomfort. And witnesses who looked at the same spots reported seeing nothing. They looked at the ground or water that held the missing person's attention. They saw ordinary terrain. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that should command such focus. But several witnesses reported feeling something when they looked. A pull, an urge to look more closely, a tightening in the chest, a sensation that something was there, just beyond perception, waiting to be seen. They did not see it, but they felt its presence, and they walked away. I have developed a theory, though I present it with appropriate caveats. This is speculation based on pattern recognition, not scientific hypothesis with experimental support. The looking down phenomenon may represent a form of selective visibility. Something exists at certain locations that becomes visible to certain people under certain conditions. Most people walk past without perceiving it. Some people stop and stare. What determines who sees and who does not? I have no answer. The missing people came from varied backgrounds and experiences. No obvious characteristic marked them as different from people who walked the same trails safely. Maybe the visibility is random. Maybe some people simply encounter the phenomenon at the moment of its appearance, while others pass the same spot moments earlier or later and see nothing. Maybe the visibility depends on attention. Maybe people who look more carefully, who study the ground rather than scanning ahead, are more likely to perceive what is normally hidden. Maybe the visibility depends on mental state. Maybe people experiencing certain emotions or thoughts are more receptive to perception that others filter out. I do not know. The data does not reveal the mechanism of visibility, but the data does suggest that visibility has consequences. People who see whatever is there become absorbed. Their attention locks. They cannot respond to external stimuli. They are held by what they are seeing. And then they move toward water. Not always the nearest water, not always obvious water, but water. The low point of the terrain, the place where gravity pulls things down, They remove their boots. They enter the water. They disappear from any place that can be searched. Where do they go? I do not know. The searches found nothing. Professional teams with trained dogs and dive equipment covered the water and surrounding terrain. The missing people were not there. They were not dead in the water. They were not hidden nearby. They were not anywhere that could be located through systematic search. They were simply gone. I want to address a question that viewers may have. Am I suggesting something supernatural? I am not suggesting anything. I am presenting a pattern in the evidence. The pattern is unusual. It does not match conventional explanations for wilderness disappearances. It implies something that current understanding cannot accommodate. But unusual does not mean supernatural. It means not yet explained. Science has repeatedly encountered phenomena that seemed inexplicable before they were understood. Ball lightning was considered mythological until physicists documented and studied it. Rogue waves were dismissed as sailor legend until oceanographers measured them. Continental drift was considered impossible until evidence forced acceptance. The looking down pattern may eventually be explained through conventional science, some neurological or environmental or perceptual phenomenon that causes the observed behavior and outcomes. Or it may never be explained. Some things remain mysterious. Human understanding has limits. I am not claiming to know what the missing people saw. I am not claiming to know where they went. I am documenting a pattern and presenting evidence. What you conclude from that evidence is your decision. I want to end with something the interviews taught me about the nature of attention. We believe we see the world. We trust our perception to show us what is there. We walk through landscapes assuming that what we perceive is what exists. But perception is not reception. The brain does not passively record reality. It constructs experience from selected inputs, filtering most sensory information as irrelevant, highlighting what evolution deemed important, what might exist that we filter out, what might be visible if we paid attention differently, what might be there, right at our feet, that we walk past without seeing. The missing people saw something. Their behavior proves that. They stopped and stared and gave that something their complete attention. Maybe they were seeing something we all could see if we looked the right way. Something always there, always present, just below the threshold of normal perception. Or maybe they were seeing something that chooses who to reveal itself to, something that waits beneath the surface for certain people at certain times. I do not know which possibility is correct. I do not know if either captures the truth. I know only what the evidence shows. 34 people looked down and saw something. They could not look away. They walked toward water. They did not come back. Whatever they saw, wherever they went, the pattern holds. They were looking down, and then they were gone. Beyond the 7 cases I presented in detail, the pattern appears across the full database. Let me share brief accounts of additional cases that demonstrate the consistency of the phenomenon. March 2008. Simon Fletcher, 61, retired teacher from Portland, Oregon. He entered Mount Hood National Forest for a day hike he had completed at least 50 times. A trail runner encountered him standing at a creek crossing, gazing into the water. The runner called out a greeting. No response. When Palmer's wife reported him missing 2 days later, searchers found his day pack at the creek. His boots were at the water's edge. 14 days of searching found nothing. September 2011. Diana Spencer, 44, accountant from Denver. She entered Rocky Mountain National Park for a solo backpacking trip. A pair of photographers encountered her kneeling beside a small alpine lake, her hands pressed against the rocky shore, her attention fixed on the water. They asked if she was photographing something. She did not acknowledge them. Her tent was found at a campsite 3 miles away. Her boots were found at the lake shore. 11 days of searching found nothing. June 2013. Robert Lawson, 33, software engineer from San Jose. He entered Yosemite National Park for a climbing trip. A fellow climber encountered him at the base of a cliff, standing motionless, looking down at the talus at his feet. The climber assumed he was scouting a route or examining rock quality. When Lawson failed to return to his vehicle, searchers found his climbing gear at the cliff base. His boots were beside it. 9 days of searching found nothing. November 2014. Margaret Turner, 57, nurse from Albuquerque. She entered Bandelier National Monument for a day hike through ancient ruins. A ranger encountered her standing at the edge of a dry stream bed, her gaze fixed on the sand below. The ranger asked if she needed assistance. She turned slowly and smiled, but did not speak. She turned back to the stream bed. The ranger continued his rounds. Her vehicle was found at the trailhead the following day. Her day pack was found in the stream bed. Her boots were beside it. 7 days of searching found nothing. April 2017. James Henderson, 49, contractor from Salt Lake City. He entered the Wasatch Mountains for a spring hike to assess trail conditions for a summer trip. A pair of mountain bikers encountered him standing at a snowmelt pool, his attention fixed on the ice-fringed water. They asked if the trail was passable ahead. He did not respond. His truck was found at the trailhead 2 days later. His pack was found beside the pool. His boots were at the water's edge. 10 days of searching found nothing. August 2020. Rebecca Mason, 38, physician from Seattle. She entered North Cascades National Park for a multi-day backpacking trip. A group of thru hikers encountered her standing at a glacial stream, gazing into the milky blue water. They commented on the beautiful color. She did not acknowledge them. Her tent was found at a campsite a mile away. Her pack was found beside the stream. Her boots were at the water's edge. 12 days of searching found nothing. February 2022. Michael Brooks, 52, professor from Berkeley. He entered Point Reyes National Seashore for a coastal hike. A dog walker encountered him standing at the edge of a sea cliff, looking down at the rocks and surf below. The walker called out a warning about the unstable edge. Brooks did not respond. Park rangers later found his vehicle in the parking area. His day pack was found on the cliff edge. His boots were beside it. 8 days of searching found nothing. In every case, the same elements recur. The missing person was looking down, at water, at ground, at something beneath the surface they were standing on. They did not respond to others who approached. They seemed unaware of anyone else's presence. Their boots were found at the water's edge, or the equivalent terrain feature, removed and placed carefully. Searches found nothing beyond the gear. The pattern holds across cases separated by years and thousands of miles. The families carried different weights. Simon Fletcher's wife still lives in their Portland home, but has removed all hiking gear from the house. The closet where his boots and pack once hung is now filled with other things. She cannot look at trail maps or wilderness photographs. The outdoor world he loved became the world that took him. Diana Spencer's sister created a memorial fund in her name, supporting trail maintenance in Rocky Mountain National Park. She chose to honor the places her sister loved, rather than avoid them. Different people process grief differently. Robert Lawson's parents still hope he will be found. They check missing persons databases weekly, looking for any John Doe who might be their son. They cannot accept that he walked to a cliff base and ceased to exist. Parents should not outlive their children. Their hope is a form of refusal to accept that they have. Margaret Turner's husband remarried 3 years after her disappearance. He felt guilty, but also felt he had no choice. Their children needed stability. The house needed life. He still dreams about her sometimes, standing at the edge of a dry stream bed, looking at something he cannot see. James Henderson's brother scattered symbolic ashes at the snowmelt pool where his pack was found. There were no actual remains to scatter, but the ritual mattered. A place where grief could be expressed. A location where loss could be acknowledged. Rebecca Mason's medical colleagues established a scholarship for aspiring wilderness medicine practitioners. They converted her passion for both fields into opportunity for others. The scholarship recipients carry her legacy forward without knowing the mystery of her disappearance. Michael Brooks's department at Berkeley hosts an annual memorial lecture in his name. Scholars gathered to discuss topics he cared about, keeping his intellectual contributions alive. The cliff where he vanished is never mentioned. Some things are too raw for academic settings. Each family found ways to continue. None found answers. The questions remain. What did they see? Where did they go? Why them? I want to describe what it feels like to work on these cases. The early phase involves standard investigative procedures, collecting documents, reading reports, building databases. This work feels clinical, detached. Numbers and categories and geographic coordinates. The middle phase involves personal contact, interviewing witnesses, speaking with families, visiting locations. This work feels heavy. Real people with real losses, real pain that words cannot address. The late phase involves pattern recognition, seeing connections across cases, understanding that something systematic is occurring. This work feels unsettling. The patterns suggest implications that are difficult to accept. After 300 reports, my hands shook. Not from physical exhaustion, from the accumulation of recognition. Case after case where witnesses described the same behavior. Person after person who looked down and then vanished. I began to wonder what I would do if I encountered the phenomenon. If I walked a trail and felt my attention drawn downward. If I found myself staring at the ground or water with an intensity I could not explain. Would I look away? Would I have the strength to break the focus? Would I walk back to the trail and continue safely home? Or would I keep looking? Would curiosity override caution? Would the pull become irresistible? I do not know. I have never experienced the phenomenon directly. I have only documented what happens to others who do. But I think about it. When I hike now, I am careful where I look. I keep my eyes on the trail ahead. I do not let my attention settle on the ground beneath my feet. Maybe this is paranoia. Maybe the phenomenon is rare enough that I will never encounter it. Or maybe attention is the key. Maybe looking carefully at the wrong spot triggers visibility. Maybe the missing people saw what they saw because they happened to look closely at places most people pass without notice. If that is true, then not looking might be protective, might be the difference between walking safely home and walking into water that leads somewhere else. I do not know if this reasoning is correct. I am making decisions based on incomplete understanding. But incomplete understanding is better than none. The missing people did not know what they were seeing. They did not know where it would lead. They looked and they followed, and they did not come back. I will not look. That is my choice. That is my protection. The investigation continues. New cases appear. New witness statements arrive. New families contact me with stories that fit the pattern. I add each case to the database. I code the witness accounts. I verify the looking down behavior where it appears. The pattern holds. New cases confirm what earlier cases established. Something draws attention downward. Something leads people to water. Something takes them. Somewhere searches cannot follow. I still do not know what it is. I may never know. But I will keep documenting. I will keep interviewing. I will keep building the evidence that connects these cases. Maybe someday someone will understand. Maybe someday the pattern will reveal its cause. Until then, I can only present what I have found. They were looking down. 34 out of 41. The number holds. The physical evidence in these cases presents consistent anomalies that investigators struggle to explain. Boot placement is the most obvious pattern. In every case with recovered equipment, the missing person's footwear was found at the water's edge or equivalent terrain feature. Not scattered, not hastily removed. Placed, side by side. Positioned as if the person expected to return for them. People remove shoes for many reasons in wilderness. Crossing streams, treating blisters, changing into camp footwear. Each of these scenarios involves predictable placement patterns. But the placement in these cases does not match any standard scenario. The boots are positioned at terminal locations, spots where the scent trails end, where no tracks continue beyond. The boots mark not a transition point, but an ending. Search coordinators have remarked on this pattern. Boots at water's edge suggest water entry, but water entry should leave evidence. Bodies float or sink. They decompose and release gases. They wash downstream or settle in pools. They are found eventually. These bodies are never found. The water features involved range from ankle-deep streams to 40-foot-deep alpine lakes. Some are clear enough to see every stone on the bottom. Some are searched by dive teams with sonar and underwater cameras. Nothing is found. The missing people enter water and cease to exist anywhere that can be searched. Pack placement follows a different pattern. Packs are found leaning against trees or rocks, positioned as if set down temporarily. The contents are typically intact. Food, water, navigation equipment, communication devices. Everything needed to continue the trip or to be rescued. The missing people did not abandon their gear in panic. They did not scatter equipment during a crisis. They set their packs down carefully, as if they planned to return. Journal entries provide another consistent pattern. In cases where the missing person kept a trip journal, the final entries describe normal conditions: good weather, pleasant hiking, plans for the next day or segment of the trip. No entries indicate distress, illness, or unusual experiences. No entries mention the phenomenon that would soon draw their attention downward. Whatever they saw, it appeared suddenly, without warning, without any documented premonition. The witness accounts describe the same sudden onset. One moment the missing person was hiking normally, behaving ordinarily, engaging with the world around them. The next moment, they were stopped, fixed, absorbed in something invisible beneath their feet. The transition appears instantaneous. No gradual shift from normal to abnormal. No warning signs that witnesses could identify in retrospect. One moment, normal. The next moment, entranced. Then movement toward water. Then gone. I have consulted geologists about the terrain patterns in these cases. They note that the disappearance sites share no obvious geological characteristics. Different rock types, different soil compositions, different hydrological features. No subsurface formations that might explain unusual effects. If something in the Earth itself caused the phenomenon, it should appear in areas with shared geological profiles. But the cases scatter across every type of terrain the continent offers. The geologists suggest that whatever draws attention downward, if anything does, is not a function of the physical substrate, not radon seepage or magnetic anomalies or underground water features. Something else. Something that exists at these locations without leaving geological signatures. I have consulted wildlife biologists about animal behavior at disappearance sites. Several witnesses mentioned unusual reactions from animals. Robert Hayes' horse became agitated when approaching the dry wash where Teresa Collins was standing. The animal refused to advance, showing behavior its rider had never seen before. Biologists note that animals sometimes detect phenomena humans cannot perceive. Infrasound, electromagnetic fluctuations, chemical traces too faint for human senses. If the phenomenon produces any such signals, animals might react while humans remain unaware. But this explanation has limits. Most cases involve no animal witnesses. Horses and dogs are not present to show reactions. Whatever the phenomenon is, it does not consistently produce signals that ambient wildlife detects or avoids. Or perhaps it does, and we simply do not notice. Perhaps birds fall silent at certain locations. Perhaps predators avoid certain terrain. Perhaps the subtle changes in animal behavior happen constantly around the phenomenon, and we walk past without recognition. I have begun noting wildlife patterns when I visit disappearance sites. The silence at the Hoh River Creek crossing, the absence of birdsong, the stillness that settled over the forest as I stood where Mitchell's boots were found. Coincidence, perhaps, or perhaps a hint at detection methods we have not properly explored. The psychological profiles of the missing people show no common pathology. I have reviewed available mental health records, interviewed family members about psychological history, examined journals and communications for signs of distress. The missing people were not suicidal. They were not experiencing acute psychiatric episodes. They were not disconnected from reality in any documented way. They were ordinary people, functional, employed, maintaining relationships, pursuing hobbies, planning futures. People who had every reason to return home. Whatever drew their attention downward, it was not a product of pre-existing mental illness. This does not mean psychological factors are irrelevant. Perhaps certain mental states make the phenomenon visible. Perhaps stress or exhaustion or solitude opens perception to things normally filtered. But if psychological vulnerability were the key factor, we would expect the missing people to show more signs of it. We would expect their journals to document distress, their families to report concerns, their behavior before the final trip to suggest instability. None of that appears. They seemed fine. They were fine. And then they saw something, and they followed it. And they were gone. I have wondered whether time of day matters. Reviewing the witness accounts, I notice a concentration in midday and early afternoon. The majority of final sightings occurred between 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. This could reflect simple probability. More people hike during those hours, so more encounters happen then. The pattern might be artifact rather than signal, but it could also reflect something about the phenomenon. Perhaps certain light conditions affect visibility. Perhaps the angle of sun through canopy or water surface creates opportunities for perception that other times do not offer. I have not collected enough data to draw conclusions. The sample is small for temporal analysis. Too many cases lack precise time stamps for final sightings. But I note the pattern. Midday encounters. When shadows reach minimum and light penetrates deepest. When the ground and water are most fully illuminated. If the phenomenon involves seeing something normally hidden, optimal lighting conditions might matter. I have wondered whether solitude is required. Most of the missing people were alone when they disappeared. They had separated from companions or were hiking solo from the start. But several cases involved witnesses standing within feet of the missing person. Patricia Warren had a fishing guide nearby. Leonard Crawford had hikers right next to him. Catherine Bennett had a ranger at her shoulder. Solitude does not seem strictly necessary. The phenomenon can appear with others present, but perhaps attention matters more than solitude. Perhaps the missing people had achieved a certain mental state that others nearby had not. Perhaps they were available to see what others could not. The witnesses felt something, the pull, the urge to look more closely, but they did not see what the missing people saw. Something held them back from full perception. Maybe interruption protected them. Maybe their awareness of others or their need to continue their own journeys prevented the complete absorption that affected the missing. The missing people had no such interruption. They looked and kept looking until they saw everything, and then they followed. The phenomenon seems to prefer remote locations, but not exclusively. Most cases occur deep in wilderness, miles from trailheads, far from roads and other people, places where isolation is normal and encounters are rare. But several cases occurred near popular areas. The Hoh River Trail. Mitchell hiked is well-traveled. The White Mountain trails Crawford walked see thousands of visitors each summer. The glacier paths Bennett followed are among the most popular in the park system. The phenomenon does not require absolute isolation. It can appear in places where others pass regularly. Perhaps it appears briefly. Perhaps it manifests at a particular spot for a short duration, visible only to whoever happens to be looking at that moment. The next hiker who passes sees nothing, never knowing what appeared minutes earlier. This would explain why searches of disappearance sites find nothing. By the time searchers arrive, hours or days later, whatever was there has passed. The location returns to ordinary terrain, indistinguishable from any other section of forest or stream or shore. The phenomenon leaves no lasting trace. It appears, selects its observer, draws them away, and vanishes. Until the next time. I do not know how many people have seen the phenomenon and not followed. My database contains cases where people disappeared. The witnesses saw someone absorbed in downward focus, then watched them walk away toward water. The pattern documents what happens when someone follows, but others may have seen it and resisted. Others may have felt the pull and broken free. Others may have had experiences that match everything the witnesses describe, except they walked away instead of walking toward water. Those people would not appear in my database. There would be no missing persons report, no search operation, no case file to analyze. They would simply continue their lives, carrying the memory of a strange moment in wilderness. The time they stared at the ground and could not look away. The time they felt something pulling at their attention. The time they almost followed, but did not. How many such people exist? I do not know. If you are one of them, I want to hear from you. Your experience might reveal something the cases of the missing cannot. The moment of choice, the act of resistance, what it felt like to break free. You saw it and came back. That makes your story essential. Contact me. Help me understand what you escaped. The investigation has changed how I move through wilderness. I still hike. I still visit forests and mountains and shores. But I move differently now. I keep my eyes on the horizon. I scan the trail ahead. I do not let my gaze settle on the ground beneath my feet. This may be unnecessary caution. The phenomenon is rare. Tens of thousands of people hike without incident for everyone who vanishes. The odds of encountering whatever draws attention downward are extremely small, but the consequences of encounter appear to be absolute. Among those who see it, none seem to return. The phenomenon may be rare, but its effects appear to be permanent. I choose not to risk perception. I choose not to look closely at ground or water. I choose to walk past the places where something might be visible. Maybe this protects me. Maybe it does not. Maybe the phenomenon selects its observers in ways that my behavior cannot influence. But I will not help it. I will not make myself available. I will not look down and wait to see what looks back. The missing people did not know what they were doing. They did not know that looking closely would lead somewhere they could not return from. Now I know. Now you know. We can choose differently. The water features in these cases deserve particular attention. In every case, the missing person's final tracked location was near water. Not always large bodies of water. Often small features, creeks, pools, tarns, snowmelt streams, dry washes that carry water only during storms. The water does not need to be deep. Harold Mitchell's scent ended at a creek maybe 8 inches deep. Patricia Warren stood in water that barely covered her ankles. Teresa Collins's attention fixed on a wash that held no water at all. Just sand that remembered water from monsoon seasons past. Depth is not the factor. Volume is not the factor. The presence of water, or the memory of water, seems to be what matters. Hydrologists have offered various explanations. Underground aquifers creating surface effects, mineral deposits interacting with moisture, electromagnetic anomalies associated with moving water. None of these explanations account for all the cases. Dry washes contain no moving water. Alpine tarns sit in rock basins with no aquifer connection. The variety of water features defies any single hydrological explanation, but water is consistently present. The low point in the terrain, the place where gravity pulls things down, the surface that reflects and conceals simultaneously. I have stood at many of these water features. Clear streams you can see through completely, still pools that mirror the sky, dry sand that curves through desert terrain. I have looked at the water and wondered what might be visible there under different conditions, what might rise toward the surface at certain moments, what might look back at someone who looked too closely. I have never seen anything unusual, but I have felt the pull that witnesses described, the urge to look more closely, the sensation that something waits just below perception. I have always stepped back. I have always walked away. The indigenous perspectives I have encountered deserve consideration. I spoke with an elder from a Pacific Northwest tribe, whose traditional territory includes areas where several disappearances occurred. She listened to my descriptions of the cases and the pattern I had identified. She did not seem surprised. Her people, she explained, had names for places where the boundary between worlds was thin, where things could cross from one side to the other, where humans who wandered too close might find themselves somewhere else entirely. These were not evil places in her tradition. They were powerful places, dangerous the way fire is dangerous, transformative in ways that could not be predicted or controlled. Her ancestors knew to approach such places with respect, with awareness, with the understanding that what appeared there might be real in ways ordinary perception could not accommodate. She asked if the missing people had been looking down when they vanished. I confirmed they had. She nodded as if this answered something. She did not explain further. She did not offer theories or interpretations. She only observed that her people had known about such places for thousands of years, long before anyone thought to document disappearances or search for patterns. I spoke with a member of a southwestern tribe whose territory includes desert regions where other cases occurred. He shared similar perspectives: places of power, thin boundaries, the possibility of crossing into something else. He added a detail his tradition included. The things that appeared at such places were not malevolent. They were indifferent. They existed according to their own purposes, which had nothing to do with human welfare. Humans who encountered them were not victims of evil. They were simply in the wrong place at the wrong moment, visible to something that rarely became visible itself. His advice was practical. Do not look too closely at ground or water. Do not let attention settle where it should not. Keep moving through places of power rather than lingering. His people had passed such places safely for generations. They knew how to walk through without being taken. We have forgotten that knowledge, or we never learned it. We hike through wilderness, assuming all of it is equally safe, that paying attention to our surroundings is wise and protective. Maybe attention itself is the risk. Maybe looking too closely at certain places opens us to perception that should remain closed. The indigenous perspectives do not explain the phenomenon scientifically, but they suggest that the phenomenon has been known for a very long time, that the pattern I am documenting is not new, that people have been looking down and following since before written records began. The timeline of these cases raises questions. My database begins in 1967, limited by the availability of documented records. Cases before that date are harder to research, less thoroughly investigated, less completely recorded. But wilderness disappearances have occurred throughout human history. People walked into forests and mountains and never returned. Searches found nothing. Families waited for answers that never came. How many of those historical cases involved the looking down pattern? How many witnesses through the centuries described seeing someone absorbed in the ground or water before they vanished? We cannot know. The records do not exist. The witnesses are long dead. The stories were forgotten or transformed into folklore or dismissed as superstition. But the phenomenon seems timeless. Whatever exists at these places has existed for a very long time. It did not begin in 1967, when my database starts. It did not appear with modern hiking culture or wilderness recreation. It was always there. We simply did not recognize it. Or perhaps we did recognize it once, and we forgot. Perhaps the indigenous knowledge I encountered represents memory that European settlers never acquired or actively suppressed. Perhaps we colonized lands that held dangers we did not know how to perceive or avoid. We walk through places that ancient peoples approached with caution. We stare at ground and water that traditional cultures knew to pass quickly. We look closely at surfaces that have always held something beneath. And sometimes we see what is there, and sometimes we follow. I want to address the families more directly. This video will reach people who lost someone to the looking down pattern, people who have wondered for years what happened to their husband, wife, parent, child, friend. To those families, I am sorry. I cannot tell you where your loved one went. I cannot explain what they saw. I cannot promise closure or resolution or answers. What I can tell you is this: your loved one was not alone. They were not the only person who experienced this phenomenon. They were not victims of random chance or terrible luck. Something systematic happened to them. Something that has happened to many others across many years. A pattern that connects disappearances across the country, across decades, across every demographic and experiential category. This does not bring them back. It does not explain where they went or what they saw, but it provides context. It removes one burden that many families carry, the burden of wondering whether their loved one made a mistake, whether something could have been done differently, whether the disappearance was somehow preventable. These people did not make mistakes. They did not ignore warnings. They did not take unreasonable risks. They visited places they knew and trusted. They followed routines that had kept them safe on every previous occasion. The risk was not in their behavior. The risk was in the phenomenon itself, something they could not have anticipated, something that appeared without warning and drew them away. I hope that knowledge provides some measure of peace. I know it cannot fill the absence. I know it cannot answer the questions that matter most, but perhaps it helps to know that your loved one was part of something larger, that their disappearance connects to others, that you are not alone in your uncertainty. She was looking down. Those words appeared on page 47 of a missing persons report I almost did not read. A single sentence in a witness statement. Unremarkable in context. One detail among many. But that detail connected to another case. And another. And another. I followed the thread until the pattern became undeniable. Until the numbers showed something systematic was occurring. Until I understood that people were seeing something before they vanished. Something invisible to everyone else. Something that drew their attention downward and led them to water. The woman in that first report was named Eleanor Graham, 41 years old, pediatric nurse from Tacoma, Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, Washington. August 2019. Her hiking partner told investigators that Eleanor had stopped on the trail. She was looking at the ground, not the trail surface, not checking her footing, not examining a plant or mushroom. She was staring at a section of forest floor with an intensity that made her partner pause. The partner asked if she had dropped something. Eleanor did not respond. The partner walked back toward her. Asked again. No response. No acknowledgement of his presence. Then Eleanor stepped off the trail and walked into the forest. Her partner called after her. She kept walking. Her gaze was fixed on the ground in front of her, as if following something that moved through the undergrowth. Her partner followed for approximately 100 yards before losing sight of her. She has never been found. Her case file was the first I marked with the looking down detail. At the time, I did not know what I had found. I did not know that her behavior matched dozens of other cases. I did not know that her disappearance fit a pattern that would reshape my understanding of wilderness vanishings. Now I know. Eleanor Graham was one of 34, one of the 83%, one of the people who saw something invisible and followed it somewhere we cannot go. I think about her sometimes. What she saw, where she went, whether she is still somewhere, in a place beyond our reach, or whether she simply ceased to exist when she vanished from her partner's sight. I do not know. I may never know, but I know she was looking down. I know she saw something there. I know she followed it into the forest and did not come back. That is what I know. The investigation has changed how I move through the world. I still visit wilderness. The forests and mountains and shores hold too much beauty and meaning to abandon entirely. But I move differently now. I keep my eyes on the horizon. I scan the trail ahead rather than studying the ground beneath my feet. When I pass water features, I note them and move on. I do not pause to examine the surface. I do not let my gaze settle. When I hike with others, I watch them as much as the landscape. I look for the stillness that witnesses described, the fixed attention, the downward focus that signals something has begun. I have never seen the phenomenon myself. I do not know if I would recognize it before it was too late. But I remain vigilant. I remain aware. Some might call this paranoia. The phenomenon is rare. Tens of thousands of hikers walk safely through wilderness for everyone who vanishes. The statistical risk is negligible, but statistics do not comfort the families. Statistics do not explain the empty boots at water's edge. Statistics do not account for the 34 people who saw something invisible and followed it somewhere we cannot find. I choose caution over confidence. I choose awareness over assumption. I choose to carry the pattern with me and let it guide my movements through wild places. Maybe it will never matter. Maybe I will hike for decades and never encounter whatever draws attention downward. But if I do encounter it, I want to be ready. I want to recognize what is happening. I want to have the strength to look away. If you have information about a case that fits this pattern, please contact me. If you witnessed someone exhibiting the behavior I have described, I want to hear from you. Every account adds context. Every detail might reveal something the other cases have not. If you have experienced the phenomenon yourself and come back safely, I want to hear about that especially. The witnesses in my database felt the pull, but walked away. You may have felt it too. You may have almost become one of the missing. Understanding why some people resist and others follow might be the key to understanding the entire phenomenon. Contact information is in the description below. I want to end with a request. When you walk in wilderness, pay attention to your attention. Notice where your gaze falls. Notice when it lingers. If you find yourself staring at the ground or water with an intensity you cannot explain, look away. Break the focus. Turn back to the trail. Do not let curiosity pull you closer. Do not try to see what you feel is there. Do not follow whatever might be moving beneath the surface. Walk away. Go home. Tell someone what you experienced. You may be one of the people who can see it. You may be one of the people it selects. But you do not have to follow. Look away. Walk away. Come home. Because 34 people looked down and kept looking. They saw something there. They followed where it led. They never came back. You can be different. You can notice the pull and resist it. You can feel the urge and refuse it. You can come home with your story instead of becoming one of the missing. 34 out of 41. 83%. They were looking down. I have told you what they saw. Something invisible to everyone else. I have told you where they went. Into water that leads somewhere we cannot follow. I have told you what it means. A pattern in the data that defies conventional explanation. Now, the knowledge is yours. What you do with it is up to you. They were looking down. The ground held something they could see. They followed it to water. They did not come back. Now you know. Look up. Keep walking. Come home. I want to describe the process of recognizing a pattern in data that no one else has seen. The first case means nothing. A single data point is not a pattern. Eleanor Graham was looking down before she vanished. Strange detail. Mark it and move on. The second case creates coincidence. Harold Mitchell was also looking down. 2 people, same behavior. Interesting. Worth noting. Still probably random. The third case begins to suggest something. Marcus Hartley, standing at a stream, staring into the water. 3 cases, 3 witnesses, 3 descriptions of downward focus. By the 5th case, coincidence strains credibility. 5 unconnected people across different years and regions, all exhibiting identical behavior in their final documented moments. The odds against random chance start to climb. By the 10th case, pattern becomes undeniable. The behavior is too consistent, too specific, too precisely replicated across too many cases to be coincidental. Something is causing this. By the 20th case, I stopped hoping for alternative explanations. The pattern was real. The phenomenon was real. Whatever drew attention downward had been operating across my entire database, unnoticed until I thought to look for it. By the 34th case, I was simply counting, documenting the consistency, building the evidence base that could not be ignored. The process took months, reading and rereading witness statements, coding behaviors, cross-referencing details, verifying independently that what I was seeing was actually in the data. The result was the number I have shared, 34 out of 41, 83%. But the emotional reality was different from the statistical reality. Numbers convey magnitude, but not meaning. 83% does not communicate what it feels like to read case after case describing the same behavior, to watch the pattern emerge from data that seemed random until you knew what to look for. I remember the moment the pattern became certain for me, the moment I could no longer doubt what I was seeing. It was late at night. I was reading witness statements from cases I had already reviewed, checking my coding against the original documents, making sure I had not invented the pattern through wishful analysis. I was not inventing it. The pattern was there in plain language, statement after statement describing people who stopped walking, looked at the ground or water, and could not be drawn away. I closed the file and sat in the dark for a long time. The pattern meant something. It connected cases that official investigations treated as separate events. It revealed a phenomenon that nobody had recognized because nobody had thought to look for it. But the pattern also meant something terrible. Whatever was drawing attention downward was still operating. People were still disappearing. The phenomenon had not stopped or gone away. It was continuing, case by case, year by year, taking people who had no idea what they were walking into. And I could not stop it. I could only document it. I could only share what I knew and hope that awareness would protect some small number of future hikers. That is not enough. I know it is not enough. But it is what I have. I want to acknowledge what I do not know. The nature of what they saw remains unknown. Whether it was an entity, a phenomenon, a threshold, or something beyond categories we have names for, their destination remains unknown. Whether they died at the water's edge, transported elsewhere, transformed into something unrecognizable, or simply ceased to exist. The selection mechanism remains unknown. Whether certain people see and others do not based on random chance, intention, or factors not yet identified. Whether the phenomenon is singular or multiple remains unclear. Whether one thing operates across all locations or whether different things produce similar effects in different places. Whether natural or unnatural, ancient or recent, conscious or mechanical, the evidence does not reveal. I do not know if it can be stopped, avoided, controlled, or understood. What I know is limited to what the evidence shows. Behavior patterns, evidence signatures, statistical correlations, the surface features of something whose depths I cannot plumb. Maybe someone else will take this investigation further. Maybe someone with resources and expertise I lack will crack what I could not crack. I welcome that possibility. I would happily surrender this investigation to someone better equipped to continue it. But until that happens, I will keep documenting, keep analyzing, keep sharing what I find. The missing people deserve to have their cases connected. Their families deserve to know that something systematic happened. The public deserves to know that the pattern exists. That is what I can provide. Not answers, not explanations, not resolution, just documentation. Just pattern, just warning. It is not enough, but it is something. The behavior of the missing people in their final moments shares a quality I struggle to name. The witnesses do not describe fear. They do not describe confusion. They do not describe distress. They describe focus, intensity, absorption, the complete attention of someone encountering something important. Teresa Collins pointed at the sand and indicated something was right there. Her voice was calm, her certainty absolute. Leonard Crawford asked if the witnesses could see it. Not anxious, not desperate. Genuinely curious whether they shared his perception. Patricia Warren asked if the fishing guide could see it moving. The guide described her expression as peaceful. Catherine Bennett told the ranger the water was beautiful. She seemed to be experiencing wonder, not horror. Whatever the missing people saw, they did not seem to find it frightening. They seemed to find it compelling, captivating, worthy of complete attention. This troubles me in ways I find difficult to articulate. If the phenomenon were clearly dangerous, we could warn people against it. Stay away from the monster. Avoid the predator. Fear what lurks beneath. But the missing people didn't seem afraid. They seemed drawn. They seemed to want to follow. Maybe they saw something genuinely beautiful, something worth following regardless of consequence, something that offered experience beyond anything ordinary life could provide. Maybe we are not losing people to something terrible. Maybe we are losing them to something wonderful. I do not know how to process that possibility. I do not know whether it should comfort or disturb. I know only that the missing people walked toward the phenomenon willingly. They removed their boots and entered the water by choice. Whatever they saw, they wanted to see more. That willingness makes the phenomenon harder to combat. We cannot save people from things they want to follow. I have developed protocols for my own wilderness travel. When I hike alone, I keep my eyes on the horizon or the trail ahead. I do not examine the ground closely. I do not peer into streams or pools. I pass water features without pausing. When I hike with others, I watch my companions as much as the landscape. I look for signs of unusual focus, stillness that exceeds normal rest, attention that locks onto ground or water. If I saw a companion exhibiting the pattern, I would physically intervene. I would touch their arm, block their view, speak loudly and continuously until their attention broke. Maybe intervention would not work. The witnesses tried, and the missing people returned to their downward focus within moments. Maybe once someone sees whatever is there, no interruption can prevent them from following. But I would try. I would rather fail to save someone than not try at all. I share these protocols not because I believe they are foolproof, but because they represent what I can control. I cannot prevent the phenomenon from appearing. I cannot predict where it will manifest, but I can control my own behavior and remain vigilant about those around me. Maybe vigilance is enough. Maybe it is not. I continue hiking anyway. The wilderness holds too much beauty and restoration to abandon entirely. But I no longer hike naively. I no longer assume that all terrain is equally safe. Some places hold something. Some moments allow perception. Some people see what others cannot. I do not want to be one of them. The question I am asked most often is simple. What should I do if I see it? I do not have a satisfying answer. The phenomenon has taken everyone who has seen it, as far as I can determine. The witnesses felt the pull, but did not perceive the thing itself. The missing people perceived and followed. I do not know if someone can perceive the phenomenon and choose not to follow. I do not know if willpower or awareness can overcome what the missing people experienced. But here is what I would tell myself. If I found my gaze locked on the ground, my attention absorbed by something I could not identify, my body wanting to move toward water, you are seeing something real, something that exists whether or not others can perceive it. Do not dismiss your experience, but you do not have to follow. Whatever is calling you, whatever is drawing you toward water, you can refuse. You can look away. You can turn around. The pull is strong. The phenomenon has taken everyone who saw it, but you might be different. You might be the one who perceives and refuses. You might be the exception. Turn around. Walk back. Do not follow. If you cannot turn around, call out. Make noise. Signal your location. Give others a chance to reach you before you move toward water. If you cannot call out, slow down. Resist the pull 1 second at a time. Make the phenomenon work to draw you forward. Maybe none of this would help. Maybe the phenomenon is irresistible once perceived. But maybe not. Maybe intention matters. Maybe awareness creates possibility. You are not helpless. You are not automatically lost. You have a mind that can recognize what is happening and a will that can resist. Use them. Fight. Refuse. And if you escape, tell me what you saw. Your account might save others. To those preparing for wilderness travel after watching this video, I offer these final thoughts. The phenomenon is real but rare. Tens of thousands of people hike without incident for everyone who vanishes. The odds are overwhelmingly in your favor. Do not let this video keep you from wilderness. The forests and mountains and shores hold experiences that nothing else can provide. The risk of the phenomenon, while real, is small compared to the benefits of wild spaces. But go prepared. Go aware. Go knowing that certain places may hold things you cannot anticipate. Keep your attention moving. Do not let your gaze settle on any single spot for too long. If you find your focus locking onto ground or water, deliberately break it. Look up at trees or sky. Turn to face a different direction. Move your feet. Hike with others when possible. Watch your companions as well as the landscape. Be ready to intervene if someone stops and stares with unusual intensity. Trust discomfort. If something feels wrong about a location, leave. Do not rationalize the feeling or push through it. The witnesses who survived felt something odd about the missing people's behavior, but did not know how to respond. Trust the oddness. Report unusual experiences. If you encounter the phenomenon and escape, tell someone. Rangers, researchers, me. Your account might help us understand what is happening and how to prevent it. Come home. That is the most important thing. Whatever you experience in wilderness, come home. The phenomenon has taken people who knew the terrain, who prepared carefully, who had every expectation of returning safely. It could take anyone, but it does not take everyone. The survivors far outnumber the missing. You can be among the survivors. Go into wilderness. Find what you are looking for. See the beauty, and feel the wildness, and remember what the natural world has to offer. But keep your eyes up. Keep moving. Keep aware. And come home. She was looking down. That sentence started everything. A single detail on a single page of a single report. Now you have read thousands of words built on that foundation. 7 detailed cases, dozens of brief references, statistics and analysis and speculation and warning, all of it tracing back to those 4 words. She was looking down. So were 33 others, all of them seeing something invisible, all of them following something compelling, all of them walking toward water and not coming back. What were they looking at? The witnesses could not see it. The evidence does not reveal it. Where did they go? The searches found nothing. The water concealed no bodies. Will others follow? Almost certainly. Will any of them be people who watch this video? I hope not. I hope awareness provides protection. I hope knowing the pattern helps people avoid becoming part of it. But I cannot guarantee that. The phenomenon does not seem to care what we know. It operates according to its own logic, taking who it takes, appearing when it appears. We cannot control it. We can only watch for it. We can only respond when we see it happening. We can only hope that response is enough. They were looking down. Now you know what that means. Now you know what to watch for. Now you know what to do. Look up, walk on, come home. That is my final message. That is what this investigation has taught me. That is what I hope you carry with you into every wilderness from this moment forward. They were looking down. You do not have to look with them. The pattern will continue. New cases will emerge. New families will face the questions that have no answers. New witnesses will describe the same behavior, the stillness, the downward focus, the movement toward water. I will keep documenting. I will keep searching for understanding. I will keep sharing what I find, hoping that awareness might protect someone who would otherwise follow. If you have information about a case that fits this pattern, contact me. The link is in the description. Every account adds context. Every witness statement might reveal something the others have not. If you saw someone looking down and walked away, I want to hear from you. You may have escaped something. Your experience may help others escape too. The investigation continues. New cases will be added to the database. New patterns may emerge. New understanding may develop from evidence I have not yet collected. I welcome collaboration. I welcome challenges to my methodology. I welcome alternative explanations that might account for the data. What I have presented is not final truth. It is current best understanding based on available evidence. Future analysis may reveal things I have missed. Future researchers may crack what I could not crack. But until better explanations emerge, the pattern stands. 34 out of 41. 83%. Looking down before vanishing. Moving toward water. Leaving boots behind. That consistency demands attention. That consistency suggests something real is operating. That consistency is why I keep documenting, keep analyzing, keep sharing what I find. The pattern holds. They were looking down. 34 people across decades and thousands of miles. all exhibiting the same behavior, all walking toward water, all leaving their boots behind, all vanishing without trace. The witnesses watched them. The searchers looked for them. The families waited for them. They never came back. Now you know what they were doing in their final moments. Now you know what drew their attention. Now you know what the pattern means. What you do with that knowledge is your choice. How you move through wilderness from this moment forward is up to you. But you have been warned. You have been informed. You have been given what the missing people never had: awareness that the phenomenon exists. Use it wisely. Look up. Walk on. Come home.